Hey, what is up everybody? We're going to take a look at some of the best decks in Elestrals for set 1. There's not a ton of tournament results, but we have been playtesting this set for almost a year now. It's been quite a while. I know the cards are physically new, there's not a ton of tournaments to go off of, but these are generally decks that are considered very strong in the meta, and definitely decks that even if they end up not being consistently meta for the rest of set 1, you will be running into these decks a lot, and you will want to know what they're trying to do so you can potentially counter them and play against them. So let's just start with one of the strongest elements that there is, and that's Thunder. We're going to take a look at the Thunder Nexus deck first. So this is a general value deck where you're trying to use Spark It, Astrabbit, Toxian, and Zeus and Altar to generate a lot of efficiency and value and defensive cards to just basically just outlast your opponent by being able to more efficiently answer their cards than they can answer yours. You're using a lot of cheap cards with really good effects like Astrabbit, like Spark It. Spark It with a Zeus will let you rip cards out of your opponent's hand. You can then, if you stick some cards, Nexus to Astrabbit to draw more cards to filter through your deck faster. When you get to a later game scenario, you can get Toxian in play, do some Nexus to Toxian so that it can either attack over things or just start burning your opponent for more damage. And then you have a control package to go along with it to be very efficient. Some people run 3 Ambrosias, some people run a Quackler or 2 just because it's a very long-term deck. The sample sideboard here, you have Sonicore to go against some of the more aggressive decks. If you're constantly getting attacked over, Sonicore is a great answer to just attack back into aggressive decks, being 7 attack and stopping counters. You have Thunderbolt to Zeus for some more Nexus banks for Spark It and Altar use, as well as ways to get a little bit more aggressive when you're running 3 Zeus and possibly switching Sonicore out with it as well. Pandora's Box is a counter card to against some specific decks. It's great against Viserys, great against Voltempest. And then Resting on Your Laurels is great against some of the decks that really like to get lots of spirits on board. Unfortunately, Resting on Your Laurels is also a little bit of a counter to this deck, so you don't always have it online, but if you're playing either a mirror match or against like an Earth midrange deck, it's good against those decks as well. So that's Thunder Nexus. Next up is a Voltempest deck, another Thunder deck, because Thunder is again very strong in current format, mostly because of Astrabbit, a little bit because of Spark It. But Voltempest, namesake of the deck, it's a 13/10. You can disenchant Thunder or Wind from it to force an opponent to take 3 damage, and with Zeus in play, it can't be targeted. So Voltempest is one of the biggest threats in the game. If it hits play with a Zeus, it's going to be able to deal damage without attacking. If your opponent's board is open, it's basically going to be able to hit for 6 every turn. It's the best boss monster, and it's one of the only Elestrals in the game at 3 costs that are actually worth running right now. And this deck just supports it really well. You use things like Elechick to find your Zeuses, Astrabbit to filter through your deck, Spark It to basically do the same thing Nexus is doing. Rip a card your opponent's hand, get out their answers so they can't answer things efficiently. Viserys to slow down some of the attack decks. A whole slew of basically every counter rune that stops things from doing damage to you or attacking, like Gorgons, Poison Tipped Arrow, Shield, Altar, Tsunamis. Just stop your opponents in their tracks so you can get the time you need to get a Voltempest out. The sample side deck here, we have Griffius in the side deck. It's not necessary for a Voltempest deck to use. It is nice to be able to get Voltempest out on turn 2 with Griffius, so you have the extra spirit on it to start expending right away. But also playing something like Spark It and Zeus, Nexusing 2 to Spark It, ascending to Voltempest works just as fine on turn 2. So you have options. So Griffius isn't always necessary to be played, but you can run it in the main deck. An extra Viserys, Pandora's Box for the mirror match, Resting on Your Laurels for some of the Earth mid-range and Nexus stuff like before, and then Galvenom is a good anti-aggro card. It's a great way to knock out multiple counter runes, and then attack over some of the smaller 5-attack Elestrals since it's at 6. It does get expensive to use Galvenom, but it does do a lot of disruption. It's a good option if you can't get the Voltempest to ever stick, or your opponent's running a lot of back row removal so you can't keep Zeus in play to protect the Voltempest. Alright, next up is an Earth Beater deck, or also you can call it Earth Midrange deck. This deck's key goals are to get as many spirits in play as possible on your Elestrals, because you're running Tectorus. So Tectorus plus basically any rune in this deck besides, well, any permanent rune in this deck makes it 6 attack or more. You have Tectorus plus Foley, 6 attack. Victorious plus Demeter up to 7. Victorious plus Scythe up to 6. Generally, this deck likes to get pretty aggressive. If your opponent has a pretty large back row, you can use Equal Links, again with Demeter, with Scythe, with Foley, to start disrupting back row. You can use Viserys to just have a good attacker. You get more Viseryses out, they become 6 attack as well. This is generally just a very strong, aggressive, to mid-rangey kind of deck that can play a slower grind game where you play Victorious as just a big attacker threat, don't actually attack into anything, then get the Equal Links out, break a bunch of back row with the Equal Links, maybe break some things, break your opponent out with a Healer's Chariot Ride so they can't stop your attacks. You have Sprouter. Sprouter is secretly a 5 attack in this deck because it searches out Scythe. Use Foley to make it 6 attack. Demeter's just general combo stuff with Altar and Equal Links, get stats into board. Scythe, again, you're searching out that Sprouter. You're running 2 to 3 Foley Forest because Foley Forest and Earth Elestrals go really well together just because Earth has some of the highest stats in the game, making Foley Forest more worth it than other elements running their stadiums. You get access to Earthquake inside Element, which is great, lots of consistency cards, and generally just you go for either a pretty aggressive start if your opponent doesn't have things to protect their Elestrals with, and then if they have a larger back row, you can play defensively by playing Attack Elestrals. Don't attack with them, hold your board presence, and then just drop an Equal Links and start machine gunning down their runes over a couple turns, allowing you to then attack over them with huge Elestrals. So Earth Midrange, Earth Beaters, it's an attack deck that can also play a slower control deck if needed. The side deck is help to get your Foley Forest with Jolton with the 3rd Foley Forest, Pandora's Box to stop the Voltempest, some extra Zaptors for those Jolton and possible Thunderstorm things for, again, a Voltempest or some other, mid-range decks, great to knock out your opponent's Demeters in a mirror match, and an extra Ambrosia just in case you need a little bit more regen against some burn decks, etc. Right, and the next deck is 5 attack. Some people call it 5 guys. It's what it says on the cover. You have Necrof, 5 attack, deals extra damage. Galaxy, basically a 5 attack. It swaps its own defense to make it 5 attack. Smaltuga's a very interesting consistency tech piece. You use Smaltuga to find Necrof, and then use Galaxy to make Smaltuga an attack threat as well. It's also one of your 2 defensive options early, but it turns itself into an attack threat with Galaxy. Sorlet, 5 attack, again on the cover, 5 attack Elestrals. Viserys, secretly a 5 attack Elestral, on the cover, 5 guys, right? Astrabia, because that consistency tool is way too good. This deck is a very beatdown heavy, just outlast your opponent by just constantly putting attack threat, attack threat, attack threat on board, so you have some Ambrosia to recover. Earthquakes to remove bigger threats. Tsunami, because you're running a lot of water, it's going to generally make your opponent's stuff go to defense and yours not. A couple shields, some poison tipped arrows and Gorgons because staple removal. Some Healer's Chariot Rides to deal with your opponent's heavy back row. If your opponent plays 1, sets 4, turn 1, then you might need to just turn 2, Healer's Chariot Ride, wait a moment, get a board state, and then just start swinging. Nectar Gods for just extra draw cards. And then Tornado to deal with things like a Voltempest deck and such. It's like bounce Zeus's before they can pop off with some Nexus things. Very good at killing Divine Runes. Very good at getting rid of artifacts that are problematic on your opponent's board. The side deck is pretty heavy, just stop Voltempest. You get the Thunderstorms to deal with Zeus's permanently. Pandora's Box to stop the Voltempest from ascending from a Griffuse. An extra Astrab in case you need more filtering. Thunder Spirits to take care of all the extra Thunder cards we might be adding. And Necklace for Harmonia to hopefully get us over Voltempest with some of our cards. If they play the Voltempest, we need to be able to attack over it. This is a pretty heavy attack deck, and if we don't draw Earthquake, we're doomed. So that's 5 attack. It is probably the best deck right now. It's very aggressive, just low to the ground, just every turn, pressure, pressure, pressure. And it tries to take the game board state early so that your opponent can no longer respond to it efficiently. Pretty aggressive. If you're trying to play an attack tempo deck that's more so on the aggro side, you're playing 5 attack. Alright, and then next up we're moving down into probably what's more of the B tier decks at this point. And we're going to start with the fruit deck. So it's called fruit because Drataya is a dragon fruit, Lodogon's is a dragon fruit, Ambrosia and Golden Apple are literal fruits. They're an engine and archetype altogether, where Drataya, whenever you cast Ambrosia, you draw cards. Lodogon, if you cast Ambrosia or Golden Apple, you destroy a card. So with Lotagon, it turns Golden Apple discard into a 1 cost. Your opponent discards a card at random and you destroy a card in their field. As well as most players using Ambrosia, so if you play a Lotagon or Jataya, your opponent can't play those cards without giving you advantage. So that's the core of the deck, is just get Jataya or Lotagon out, get some advantage, and go big with Lotagon mid to late game, destroy your opponent's board, and start attacking in. You can play a control fruit deck where you're slowly collecting pieces. You could play a more of a combo deck. This is more on the control side. So after the fruit stuff, you're using Rummagem for consistency to find Jataya. If you already have Jataya, use Rummagem to go find Pandasin or Spinnyf to start setting up a wall. Pandasin is great at recycling your Ambrosia or Golden Apples after you've played them in the early game, so that you have kind of access to 4 or 5 apples instead, or Ambrosias instead of just the 3. Spinnyf is a great card at stopping a lot of the attack decks. It will put stuff to 0 attack, so even a Rummagem could attack over it. Astrabbit is just a great consistency card, help us find our Ambrosia, our Lotagon, or Jatayas, all for consistency cards. Earthquake, because we're in Earth priority, allows us to get some removal cards. Thunderstorm, we're running Astrabbit and Thunderstorm, gives us that Rune Disruption option besides just the Lotagon. It's great to Thunderstorm something and then ascend to the Lotagon to avoid things like PTA or Gorgons. Running a couple of Nogs for consistency, a couple of Shields for defense, Gorgons for stop our own opponent's stuff, Poison Tipped Arrow to keep our Jataya or a Rummagem alive against the 5 attack beaters as well as destroy them. And then Rise From. If you know anything about me in Rise From, I will say that Rise From is a bad card, except in this deck there is so much combo potential with Rise From and Fruit, where you can Rise From a Panda to go get an Ambrosia, so potentially you play Lotagon, Ambrosia, Rise a Panda, use Panda to get Ambrosia, Ambrosia again, recover, basically go net even on spirits and pop 2 cards on your opponent's board. You can use it to revive a Lotagon. You can use it to ascend into a Lotagon from a Jataya, revive the Jataya, and then start playing Ambrosia, generating card value and destroying cards. Lots of spots for Rise From to do well in this deck, so there's 2 of it in the deck. And 1 drops just in case you get, 2 to 3 Lotagon in your hand, you want to get rid of them. It's a good way to cycle out. The side deck can adjust into a bit more of an Earth Beater mid-range tempo deck where you can slot out a lot of the fruit stuff and slot in a lot of the mid-range stuff to make the deck a little bit more of a control Earth deck against poor matchups. The mirror match in this deck is really hard to navigate, and I wouldn't recommend playing against the mirror match because the mirror match in this deck becomes kind of who gets Jataya out in Lotagon first, and then whoever doesn't gets stuck behind because they can't play their own Ambrosias and apples anymore without getting destroyed. So against the mirror match, I think both players probably don't want to take that coin flip and will switch out. The easiest deck to switch out to into a side deck option is straight up just try to switch into Earth Beaters. With the right deck build, you can get into Earth Beaters pretty easily. And that is Fruit. My favorite deck, a little bit of a combo control deck. Try it out. Probably one of the better A tier decks there are out there in my opinion. I do stand it though, so don't listen to me too much. Alright, next up, this might not be an A tier deck, but it's definitely a very counter meta specific deck, and I wanted to give Fire some representation since there's not a lot of Fire decks going around there, and this is Leolock. It's called Leolock because you're playing Leonite to stop your opponent from casting Invoke Runes, and yourself as well. Trident of Poseidon and Poseidon combo to keep your opponent from casting any counter runes. So with Leonite and Trident of Poseidon in play, your opponent can't cast Invoke Runes, and they can't cast counter runes, and you have a big 9+ attack Elestral into play. Bonus points, if you get Hephaestus and Hammer of Hephaestus into play, you get a 13 attack Leonite that can't be removed by basically anything directly, except a Tsunami Vertakwa combo effect, basically. So this deck is all about getting to Leonite, so we have a bunch of foamies, so we can float into another Elestral, enchant it with fire. You can enchant basically a galaxy with fire, so you get a 5 defense Elestral with fire, move into Leonite, get another foamy out with fire, again, move into Leonite turn 2. A couple Amphirex, again, it allows you to get something back into play on your second turn, even if it's destroyed, so you can get to Leonite faster. It's also great fuel for a Kindleo deck. So we have lots of runes in here that are going to be dead cards in hand if we basically have more than one Poseidon or more than one Hephaestus. Kindleo is a great answer to just find ways to use those runes for basically destroy effects. Necrof as a good solid attacker and beater, just a nice card that Necrof sometimes on its own will just stick into play. Galaxy is a great defense and offense option. You can play it with a fire on it for a 5 defense card. You can play it on water for a 5 attack card, giving you some early options besides just Necrof or Foamy or defensive plays. Gives you an extra aggressive option. Runs a little bit of some random water cards for the Foamy Tutor, so Sluggle for a Foamy Tutor to get some spirits back if you need to. It's also great if Sluggle dies to revive it with Rise from the Ashes to make Sluggle free cast. Cast it with some, water or fire, just get the Leonite out that way. Some Vertaquas with our Tsunami stuff. 1 Aphros to find off a Foamy. Aphros, just like Kinley, will allow us to use our Divine Runes as basically Nexus targets, so we can actually cycle our extra Divine Runes for other cards, get some more card draw if we need to. You're really only pulling it off the Foamy and then playing it with Poseidon or Hephaestus to just get some more card draw. Using a Hephaestus to find your Trident, to find a Hammer if you need to. Your priority though is that Trident, since Hammer's only protecting you from Boombat and Sorlet more or less. Ambrosia for some recovery. We have lots of Divine Runes, so lots of reasons that we can run Altar of Stars for Nexus. We run lots of water, great for Tsunami. In the best case scenario, we have like an Amphiorix in play turn 2 off its reanimation effect. We Nexus Poseidon 1 water to it, and then ascend into Leonite, allowing us to basically make Leonite immune to Tsunami as a counter response before we get the Trident down. 1 Rise From, great to just rise from something like, Sluggle, Kinleo, just some extra responses. You only run 1 of because it's not super consistent, but it can save you the game sometimes. And some Gorgons. We can't run too many we can't run too many Invoke Runes in the deck because our whole deck is about making it so that no one can cast Invoke Runes. So that's why we're a little counter heavy and pretty Divine Rune heavy, because those aren't going to be disrupted as easily as something like just playing Leonite. No longer can we use our own Invoke Runes. Side deck, a little extra Invoke Runes, just some support Ambrosia, an extra Rise From just if we feel we need it. Some shields for the extra counter runes if we feel that we're not able to get to Leonite consistently. The counter rune package will help us get into the game a little bit easier. Pandora's Box again to stop those Voltempest combos. And Eruption to potentially surprise your opponent into game 2 or game 3 with some burst finisher at the end. It's a nice little tech choice. Sometimes your opponent's playing a combo deck or they're trying to just grind out spirits. It's good to run the Eruption and then just have a way to just punch your opponent for 3 if need be. So it's in the sideboard. That's Leo Lock. Again, goal, Leonite, Trident, Poseidon, Poseidon combo. Say that 5 times fast. And last but not least, I want to show off this deck. I stole it from Rat King in Discord, I believe. He placed 3rd in a tournament with this deck. And this is basically water, wind, counter meta. So if you don't know, the meta of the game currently is really counter rune heavy. And this deck says no. So what do we mean? So it's generally a little bit of a grindier deck. You have Caprigal and Falcane. So the things that make this a counter meta deck. Falcane destroys all your opponent's back row. Straight up, goodbye counter runes. I think Falcane should see more play. Secondly, it's a pretty core water deck, and not a lot of people run water, so a lot of people run Tsunami. So by playing a water focused deck, you're shutting off 3 cards that usually show up as 3-ofs in your opponent's deck of Tsunami. That's very, very good. It runs Sorlet for the just win package. You have Aramare, it's great at just giving your things not being able to be destroyed by our opponent's Elestrals. Doesn't see too much relevance, but it's a great 4/5 defensive stat wall and wind. You're running a wind sub package. Foamy to float into something like Caprigal after dies, you get out of a station, then go to Caprigal, stuff like that. I am surprised this deck doesn't run Trident or Poseidon, but again, this is more so just like blow up the back row and just start getting value from everything. Just get Foamy back off Caprigal, get Sluggles back off Caprigal, get Falcane to play, blow up back row, and just start swinging. It's a really interesting looking deck. I did want to just show it off because it did place decently well in a recent tournament. The side deck has some Rise From that's great with Sluggle to get Caprigals into play because you basically make the Rise From free by hitting a Sluggle with it. Vertaqua, just an extra Vertaqua is good with all Tsunamis, and you potentially could play Altar in this deck. It's just not going to be super consistent. Carrion is actually, I think, a secret kind of anti-aggro tech against a lot of the 5-attack decks. You play Carrion, run it into a 5-attack Elestral, and then run that into another 5-attack Elestral, making it a possible 2-for-1 option. I like the tech option here. Atlantis, I honestly am not super sure about the Atlantis. It might just be in here to stop something like Earth Beaters. By playing Atlantis against a fully forest, you're severely hampering the Earth Beater deck and increasing your stats over the Earth Beaters. So that's probably what it's there for. And some Earthquake tech seems fine to me. So that is this like water wind counter meta. I don't know what the name actually is. I should probably reach out to Rat to find out. So with that, there are 7 meta-ish decks that you can take a look at. More like 6 meta decks and a bonus deck that might be counter meta because it placed well recently. What deck are you guys looking to play? Do you feel like I missed anything else in the top tier, or do you think that maybe some of these decks are actually bad and we haven't realized it yet? Let me know what you guys think below, and I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you learned something.